Testing. Ah, there we go. Okay.
Test, test, test. Yeah, good.
Okay.
Okay, sorry for this technical problems here. I'm very happy to introduce you the next talk. We stay in the privacy and the privacy track. Mike Brennan will give a talk about privacy and stylometry, and this is part of his PhD. Thanks a lot, and I give the word to you now.
Thanks. Can everyone hear me okay? Is it too loud? No? It's weird to hear my own voice. Okay, so my name is Mike Brennan. I'm from Philadelphia. I go to Drexel University, and I did this work with my advisor, Rachel Greenstadt. This talk is called Privacy and Stylometry, Practical Attacks Against Authorship Recognition Techniques. Are you sure it's not too loud? Okay. A little bit? Someone said a little bit. Can you turn it down a little, Tad? Okay. So in this talk, I'm going to first talk about what authorship recognition is. And then I want to talk about the threat that authorship recognition can pose to privacy and anonymity, including some experimental results to back up the threat that I talk about. Then I'm going to talk about a study that we did about attacking authorship recognition. I'm going to discuss the study setup. I'll talk about the methodology of a few different authorship recognition methods. And then I'll explain the results that show that authorship recognition is actually very easy to attack and very easy to completely, completely dismantle. And then I want to talk about the future work, including creating some sort of tool that that can help you anonymize your writing style in order to maintain your privacy when trying to post anonymously in any form. Okay, so what is authorship recognition? In this talk, I'm actually going to be using two terms interchangeably, which is authorship recognition and stylometry. Stylometry is actually a form of authorship recognition that deals specifically with the linguistic style of the text. We're not talking about handwriting. We're not talking about contextual clues like when something was posted or the content of it. We're simply talking about the syntactic structure of the text, such as word length, letter distribution, punctuation usage, and various linguistic measurements. To give a brief history on what stylometry has been, the first major problem that stylometry dealt with was looking at the Federalist Papers, which were 85 papers published in New York in the late 1700s to try and persuade the people of New York to ratify the Constitution. Now, these papers were published anonymously, but we knew through historical records that most of them were actually authored by either James Madison or Hamilton, and 12 of these had completely disputed authorship. They did not know who wrote them. So stylometry was used to show that Madison actually authored these documents, and this data set has been used for countless stylometry studies to show new methods and things like that. Modern stylometry, that was mostly done originally using various statistical techniques, but modern stylometry has its roots in machine learning, using classifiers such as support vector machines, genetic algorithms, neural networks, and various other artificial intelligence techniques. I'll go over a little bit later on the lecture about what machine learning is for anyone who's unfamiliar. But these techniques are used extensively, and it's been a very strong point of success for AI because these techniques have been very successful in general. Oops. So why is stylometry important? It's great that you can figure out who authored a 200-year-old document, but how does it apply to the world today? Well, here's a quote from the Institute for Linguistic Evidence, and it kind of explains the importance of stylometry in things like forensics, in terms of plagiarism. Stylometry is used often in court cases, trying to figure out who wrote something, who authored some sort of document that could relate to the guilt or innocence of someone on trial. And also, it's become an important part of anonymity through some of this research. Can stylometry be used to remove to de-anonymize a document, to try and harm anonymity in some way? So what is this threat to privacy that stylometry can pose? Now, there are good techniques for location-based privacy. If you want to post something anonymously, you can use Tor, you can use a pseudonym, you can do all sorts of things so you can't trace back to where the document or was posted from on the internet, things like that. But that may not be enough. Stylometry can be used to identify authors based on their writing style, no matter what methods of location-based anonymity they took to try and publish a document anonymously. So our question is, can anonymous authors defend against this? Now, there has been some previous work in this area. There's a paper back at the Usenix security meeting in 2000 by a couple of authors that found that it takes about 6,500 words to accurately define someone's writing style. They did a whole bunch of experiments and found that the mark where it kind of doesn't really get much better after that was 6,500 words. Now, that seems like a lot, but later research has shown that it can get even smaller amounts of words can provide a fairly stable background for someone's writing style. There's also an article written a couple years ago called The Multidisciplinary Requirement for Privacy, written by Carlisle Adams. He talks about the need for anonymity being a field that takes in multiple disciplines, not just technical, not just location-based security, but also looking at writing style and things of that nature. So there are two basic methods of stylometry that can be used as a threat to anonymity. The first is supervised stylometry, and this is where you have a set of documents from known authors and a new document of unknown authorship that you're pretty sure comes from one of the authors in this known set. You can train a classifier, which I'll explain what a classifier is later for anyone who's unfamiliar. You can train a classifier to get the writing profiles of the different authors of the known text, and then you can use that information to figure out who authored the unknown text. So here's a scenario. Let's say Alice is an employee of Bob's company, and Bob runs kind of an abusive company. They don't treat their workers very well. They maybe break some laws. So Alice wants to publish a document talking about these abuses. So she publishes this anonymously. She takes great care to do so anonymously, so it can't be traced back to her computer, it can't be traced back to her home. But Bob, say, has lots of writing samples from everyone in his company, from reports that they've written, from their applications, things like that. He might only have a company of 20 people. He can then look at the writing styles of everyone in that company, compare it to this unknown document that was written about his company, and find out that Alice was in fact the author of it. This is a real threat that could happen, and Alice could be terminated or worse, depending on where this is happening. And this is kind of the basis of supervised stylometry and the threat that supervised stylometry can pose. Unsupervised stylometry is when you have a set of documents that are all of unknown authorship. You don't have any previous author information. This is also known as similarity detection. In this case, you'd be trying to figure out what documents are by the same author, regardless of who that author may be. And here's the scenario in this case. Say you have some sort of anonymous forum and some oppressive government. The participants of this forum might use it to organize protests or spread news, things like that. But there's no real way of knowing how many authors participate in this forum. There's no way of knowing the organizational structure because you can't tell who were leaders, who were not, who's posting messages. You have none of that information. Unsupervised stylometry might be able to be used in order to split up this author set, figure out how many authors there are, and establish some writing profiles for various authors that can then be fed into some sort of supervised stylometry system in order to figure out the actual identity of some of these authors. So while I hope these scenarios present a somewhat clear threat, I want to give some numbers to back it up. Now, the unsupervised case is a bit more difficult. We did take a forum and anonymize all the data, looked at 9 anonymous authors with lots and lots of posts, and only got about 35% accuracy when using just the original data set. We think that this mostly is because the documents are much shorter and it's harder to distinguish writing style in these shorter documents. So we took 5 of these authors and added a bunch of their posts together to get longer documents, and we're able to, with unsupervised learning techniques, get about 88% accuracy in figuring out what authors wrote which posts. So clearly there's a little bit more work to do here, but there is also other research going on. There are some researchers that wrote this great paper called Write Prints, and if you Google Write Prints, you can find it, who claim to have as high as 95% accuracy looking at unsupervised clustering of 50 authors or more. Now, their problem is defined a little bit differently in the fact that they're looking only at pairing of authors. They were taking just 2 documents from each author and comparing one set to the other to try and link them. So this is a much easier problem than simply looking at an unknown number of authors, an unknown number of posts per author. But still, these are encouraging results that show that the threat is there, and maybe a little more work needs to be done to really solidify the numbers. Supervised stylometry, however, the threat is quite clear. We did some research looking at a 15-subject pool, and this is what most of my talk will be about in a moment. And we found that with 79 to 90% accuracy, you could identify who the author was of a small group of authors. Other researchers, again, the Wright Prince folks, found with 50 unique authors, again, they're getting high marks of about 90% accuracy, which is significant. So we used this information to establish a study. We wanted to see if authorship recognition could be attacked, how it could be attacked, and how easily it could be attacked. We decided to do an in-depth study on attacking authorship recognition using a number of subjects. And we came to the conclusion that stylometry is very vulnerable to attack, and also that these attacks can be used in some way to protect privacy. There's some related work in the field of adversarial stylometry, but overall it's not a very well-researched field and hasn't really been looked at in any depth. Back in 2003, there was some work looking at pastiche, meaning the attempt to imitate famous authors in order to capitalize on their success and write more books. In this case, they looked at Alice in Wonderland and imitators of Lewis Carroll. And they had kind of mixed results in figuring out who authored the unknown documents. And there's some other work on automatically obfuscating document stylometry in order to preserve anonymity, where they figured out how many words they needed to change in order to get it to be recognized as someone else. Now, this seems kind of similar to the work we did, but they really are just looking at modifying a document in small, particular ways, whereas we're trying to assess the general vulnerability of authorship recognition against inexperienced human adversaries, which is kind of the hopefully realistic scenario here. So there's two attacks that we looked at. The first is an obfuscation attack. This is where you're simply trying to hide your writing style. It doesn't matter who is attributed authorship of this document. It doesn't matter. That doesn't matter at all. You're just trying to make sure it doesn't come back to you. The second attack is an imitation attack, where you're trying to specifically imitate the writing style of another author. This can be used, for framing purposes, things of that nature. Our study setup was to pick 3 representative methods of stylometry and test them all against the same data set. We had 15 authors. We had them first submit about 5,000 words of pre-existing writing that has not been modified from some sort of formal source, like a school essay, a work report, things like that. And then we had them write 2 attack passages. First, they wrote an obfuscation attack describing their neighborhood. We wanted everyone to write the same content in order to try and get rid of any sort of intricacies that might give away authorship that aren't based on the writing style. And then the second passage, the imitation attack, was to imitate Cormac McCarthy. He wrote a book, The Road, recently that some of you may have read, and try and imitate his writing to describe their day in the third person. It's important to note that these authors had no formal training in stylometry, no formal training in linguistics, and only spent about 30 to 40 minutes overall on submitting all this information. Well, mostly on the attacks. They might have spent more collecting their old documents, but spent no more than 30 or 40 minutes on these attacks. I want to go into a little more detail about imitating Cormac McCarthy because we thought this was kind of an interesting result. So as you can see from this quote, he has a very distinct writing style with some interesting word choices. Saying things like the stark black burn or charred and limbless trunks. He writes in kind of shorter sentences, things like that. And we actually have some example imitation attacks from people trying to imitate Cormac McCarthy. And you can see without any direction on what stylometry is or how it can be used to detect writing style, people did adapt to his writing style. They picked some more descriptive language. And keep in mind, it was kind of funny to read these passages because they were suddenly describing their day when they woke up as opposed to describing a post-apocalyptic wasteland. So this kind of shows, some examples there. And yeah, so now I want to go over the 3 methods that we evaluated. First, we did a validation experiment where we looked at the original 3 methods and tried to determine the accuracy of them and make sure it was as accurate as the authors of the original methods claimed they were. And then we did the attack experiment, where we determined the accuracy of these attacks against these methods. The experimental conditions were to have a set of 15 authors, but extract sets of 2, 3, 4, and 5 authors from that overall set. And the same sets were used in each method. And then we cross-validated all the results to try and get the most accurate numbers possible. Before I go into what the methods were, I just want to give a brief overview on what machine learning is. So machine learning is artificial intelligence. The idea behind it is to learn and recognize patterns automatically from some sort of information that is extracted from the text, and then or whatever it is you're studying, and then make decisions based on that. So the most common form of machine learning is a classifier. Anyone that's familiar with spam filters, which I imagine all of you are, your spam filter is probably a Bayesian classifier. It looks at the words in the email. It determines the probability of whether or not that email is spam based on the occurrence of certain words, and adjusts those probabilities as the system gets trained on more spam messages. The extracted features I talk about, features are just pieces of information in whatever you're trying to classify. So in the spam case, they are generally words. The features are words and how often those words appear in spam messages and how often they appear in non-spam messages. So it's important to pick good features, and you'll see in each of these methods, different features are used. Some basic linguistic features that we used here are things like word counts, sentence counts, letter distribution, punctuation, and then we use some more complicated measurements like lexical density, which looks at how many unique words there are compared to how many total words there are, and some readability indexes that look at sentence length, the complex word ratio, where a complex word is a word of 3 syllables or more, excluding lots of common words. And the Gunning-Fogg readability index in particular gives you some idea on the reading level that is required to read a document. The first method we looked at was the signature stylometric system. This is not one that we coded, but rather kind of an out-of-the-box system that you can find if you search for signature stylometry. And we found that it had a 95% base accuracy on the unmodified base data set. The second method we looked at was a neural network classifier based on 9 specific linguistic features. And we had almost 80%, about 78.5% base accuracy. Just a note, a neural network is a simulation of a biological neural network where you have a set of input nodes and a set of output nodes. The input nodes indicate the features, the output nodes indicate the possible classes, which in this case are authors, and the hidden nodes are modified accordingly in order to get the best classifier possible. And these are all arranged during the training phase of a neural network classifier. So you train it on a bunch of known data, and then you give it some unknown data and see what the results are. There we go, okay. The third method is a synonym-based classifier that didn't look at the linguistic features so much as the word choices, which is a linguistic feature. And we had 88 to 99% accuracy, depending on how many authors there were. Here's actually a pretty example of how this works. So you'll see the top and the bottom are known documents. The first sentence is colorless green dreams sleep furiously, and the bottom sentence is bright verdant grass sways peacefully. And this unknown sentence is colorful, verdant dreams sleep furiously. So there are more words in common with the top sentence than the bottom sentence, but that unknown sentence is actually attributed to this last author because verdant has many more synonyms available to use, so it's a more salient feature. And therefore, the overall point value lends that sentence being attributed to the last author as opposed to the first author. This is a pretty neat technique, and we thought it'd be good to take techniques that dealt with different parts of linguistics. So here's the accuracy on the original training set. You can see the 3 different methods. This black line here represents random chance. So what would your accuracy be if you just randomly selected and randomly picked what author it could be? So all of them are much higher than random chance. Most of them hover around 80 to 90%, so in some cases going up near 100%. When we introduced the obfuscation attacks, however, the accuracy went way down. It went down to just about random chance. So these same methods that had anywhere from 70 to 100% accuracy in unmodified text, when they tried to detect the authorship of the attack passages, the modified obfuscated text, they did no better than random chance. Interestingly, when we introduced the imitation attacks, the results went even lower, down to almost 0 in most cases. This might sound interesting because you think, well, how come the subjects weren't as good at imitating, how come the authors weren't as good at obfuscating their own style as they were at imitating someone else's? And we thought this is probably because when you're imitating someone's style, you're given some more direction on how to change your style, and we ended up with these results. Furthermore, when people tried to imitate Cormac McCarthy, these graphs here show the success rate in actually imitating Cormac McCarthy. So 60 to 90% of the cases in general, people were able to successfully imitate Cormac McCarthy and his writing style and have these systems think that they were in fact Cormac McCarthy. There's some interesting discussion points to bring up based on this. One is, why are some authors more susceptible to attack than others? So we noticed when we were looking through these results that when people were obfuscating their writing style, when the authorship wasn't attributed to them, it was attributed to some other random person quite often. I don't know if this means that that person has some sort of general writing style. We did ask some people how they modify their writing style informally, and they said, oh, well, I shortened my sentences, or I wrote simpler. So it is possible that they are writing, it's possible they are writing more like this, this other author that maybe has shorter sentences or writes with less complex words. But it's an interesting point. Some methods also perform better than others, so that's another question that we have. Clearly, here you can see that it was much easier to imitate Cormac McCarthy using the synonym-based system as opposed to the other systems, probably because he uses such intense vocabulary that if you pick a few of the words that he uses, the systems will think that you're actually Cormac McCarthy a bit easier. Would these results hold up in a stricter domain? So we looked at kind of a basic, set of documents, but what if you were looking at very, very specific domain? What if you were looking at just mathematical reports? What if you're looking at just government reports, something like that? Would these things be as susceptible to attack when you don't have as many variables involved? What if the participants were skilled in linguistics or stylometry? I think it's a fair assumption to make that these folks who are not skilled at all did a very good job attacking. One would expect people who understand what stylometry is and understand what features they're looking for could attack these systems much better. And what features and methods could offer some resistance to these attacks? This is kind of an unknown right now, but we believe there must be some things, at least in these passages, that can do a little bit better of a job. We haven't seen anything yet that's done better with this work, but certainly there could be. So how can we use these attacks to improve privacy? Well, if you are trying to hide your writing style, if you want to maintain your anonymity, there's a few things to remember. First is that these methods failed, but others might not. Just because you hide your writing style and can trick these methods, that's no definitive proof that you're going to fool all stylometry methods out there. But if you are trying to hide your writing style, the best method would be to try to imitate someone else, probably with someone with some sort of a easy to understand writing style. And also write less. So as we saw earlier, it was much more difficult to classify the forum data set, we think because it was much smaller, the passages were much smaller. So writing less would be a good part in trying to hide your writing style. So what do we need here? We think that we need a tool that will help people anonymize their writing style. And I want to talk about that a little bit more. So what a style modifying tool needs. First, we need a variety of methods and features. And with that, we can test any sort of attack passages against a large number of features, of methods, and really see if you did a good job of anonymizing your writing style. We need a large corpus of existing authors, which I'm going to go into a little bit more in a second, but we want to be able to compare your writing style to a whole lot of authors and see if the system could pick you out or not. It should be AI assisted. We don't think it's really very feasible to have some sort of magic button anonymize my writing style because that is sort of would be a very hard natural language processing tool to somehow change your writing style and maintain the semantic content in such a way that it's readable and says what you want it to say. But maybe something instead that would analyze the writing style and suggest changes that you could make or tell you what methods work better or worse. And it should have some non-stylometry features, such as contextual clues. It should strip out timing information, content information, things like that might be indicators of who you are. So building a corpus, this is kind of where we are going to need some help soon. We would like to collect a lot of data from people that would be interested in building some sort of attack corpus where they, on top of the stuff that we already have, where we have large amounts of information from different authors. First of all, we need, before we start collecting this information, we need IRB approval, which is the Institutional Review Board in the United States. Whenever you're doing experiments in university with human subjects, even if something as benign as asking for writing samples, you need approval from this board, so we're working on that right now. We would also like this to happen in multiple languages. I've already gotten multiple questions from people saying, that's great that you have this, but I live in Germany and we speak German and we have these court cases coming up that we're concerned about, so can you help us there? And I say, well, I don't speak German, but hopefully some people here do, and maybe would be interested in submitting some of their writing samples, which we would, of course, not link back to your name. And if you're interested in helping this in any way, please send me an email. I'll leave my email up at the board at the end, and then when I get this together, I can send you an email and ask for your help. There's some other future work that we're interested in. So one is certainly testing more stylometric methods. We felt our methods were representative, but there's many more out there that we should look at. Another is looking at imitation attacks against other authors. So we picked Cormac McCarthy because he had kind of a distinct writing style, and we thought it would be easy for people to engage with the material because we wanted really good responses. We wanted people to feel like they had a chance, people to feel like that they could really get into the reading sample that we gave them. Maybe this was too easy, and maybe it would be more difficult to try and imitate an author without such a distinct style. We would like to, again, look at the effectiveness of this in unique domains. So say you have short messages like Twitter messages or eBay or Facebook updates, things like that. If you aggregate a whole lot of those, could you figure out writing profiles for those authors that could be used to identify more short messages? We'd like to see if additional demographic information could be extracted. There has been some work saying that, you can figure out if a writer is male or female, you can figure out where they're from. But if people try to anonymize their writing style, do you also anonymize those pieces of demographic information? And if not, what kind of a threat will that still pose even if you anonymize your styles? So what if Alice was the only woman working at Bob's company and she was able to hide her writing style but not the fact that she's a woman? That would be a problem. Finally, we think maybe we should have a better demonstration of the effectiveness of unsupervised stylometry, because while the threat seems to exist, we should possibly do a better job at having higher numbers to say, look, if you take this anonymous form, you can in fact de-anonymize it, so we should take some steps to do that. And I should clarify also that we have no interest in making any sort of de-anonymization tool that people can use against you. We just want to see if these things are possible before we start, waving too many red flags about the threat that it contains. And we think we sufficiently prove this in most cases, but maybe not in the unsupervised case. So the conclusion here, this is not really the end of stylometry in sensitive areas. We don't think this is conclusive enough to say, you can't use stylometry in courts anymore. But it certainly raises a lot of questions. And also, new methods that come out should test for the adversarial threat. Stylometry is useful. It has a lot of good things. It's helped in a lot of cases, but it can also present a threat to privacy. And attacking stylometry could be some way to mitigate this threat. And finally, there is potential for an arms race here in developing attack-resistant methods of stylometry, but then developing counterattacks to counter those new methods. And we're kind of curious to see where this where this will go, and hopefully we'll have some interesting stuff. So I want to take questions now, but if you don't have any questions, I actually have some more questions that I normally get to go over. But first, I guess I want to say thanks, and if you have any questions, please ask away.
Many thanks. Are there questions, please? Yes. Maybe you can come over here, please, because this microphone is not switched on. I come to you.
How unique would someone's writing method be? I mean, I can imagine that the chance of someone having the same writing style as me here in this tent would be pretty small.
I'm sorry, can you say, I can't hear you.
Sure.
Yeah.
How unique would someone's writing style be?
How unique would someone's writing style be? I guess it's hard to say. Most methods only look at small numbers of authors, but recently there have been some more work looking at 25, 50, 100 authors, and still showing relatively high levels of accuracy. So that would indicate someone's writing style is very unique. But some of the methods that show a big drop in accuracy once they get past 10 authors would maybe say otherwise. So I think it depends on the style, and but I would say, given how easy it is to modify some of these systems, your writing style is possibly not as unique as it could be, but then again, maybe it's just because we're looking at the wrong features. So it's kind of a hard question to answer.
Okay, further questions?
When I ask this, can't wait to be filmed when asking. So if you were to use like something like Moses or Babelfish to translate your writing into another language and then back again, someone just mentioned it to me right now, but people have said that before perhaps that will help. I think that's probably not a good protection, but I don't have any hard data. Could you speak to that point?
Yeah, we haven't tried that yet, but that's something we've thought about. I also don't think it would necessarily be too good a protection, because certain things like, depending on what language you're using, I would imagine certain things like sentence length and word complexity wouldn't change too much, although, again, it totally depends on the language you use. Also, one of the things we're talking about in the tool is maintaining the semantic structure of the text, and not all these translation methods are the best and might lose some of the meaning in between. And finally, I think, at least in this attack, when we asked people to hide their writing style, we said, could you please do so in such a way that if someone looked at the paper, it wouldn't raise an eyebrow. It wouldn't have really disjoint text. It wouldn't have really big problems that someone would say, something definitely happened to this document. That might not always be a requirement, but I think that would possibly break that. I think someone would probably see that. This looks like it was translated. It doesn't make sense. There's some words that weren't translated, and so on. So it could help, but I don't know how much yet.
Further questions?
You mentioned attacks that work against the classifiers you built, but have you looked at extracting... You mentioned attacks that work against the classifiers you built. Have you looked at extracting different features that still fall out into the classes you originally had?
So using the same classifiers that we had, but adding more features to them? Yeah, I mean, I have done more work looking at function words, looking at bigrams and unigrams of text, things like that. They've all shown somewhat similar results, though not all of them are as effective as others. But there are just, there are lots of stylometry papers out there. There are lots and lots and lots of methods, and a lot of them use similar techniques, and we think we covered a lot of those techniques. But certainly there's always going to be room for exploration of more features, and I'd imagine that if there's any sort of arms race that goes on here, it'll take that form of people figuring out other features that could be used that maybe haven't been looked at yet.
Okay, we still have time for further questions. This seems not to be the case. So,
I think
in the back. Thank you.
Do you have any intuition how aging affects these tools? Like, would a child change its writing style? Would an adult change its writing style?
So I don't know if it would be age in particular, but a standard known thing in stylometry is that writing style does they say writing style does gradually change over time. And that might be related to age or might be related to other things, but did you have a comment? Okay, this is Rachel, my advisor and co-author. She just said, go ahead.
Well, there are some papers that, I don't know how to stop this from being awful feedback, but there are some papers that talk about extracting from larger sets of authors, just like demographic information, and one of the things they can usually extract is things like gender and age.
Okay, the very last question, if there's need for this?
No.
Can you see some?
If not, I just want to, there's a couple I want to touch on here
Yeah,
because I get asked them a lot.
Okay, maybe 3 more minutes.
Okay,
Is this fine?
Well, there's actually one kind of I really want to bring up because if anyone else can help me with this, that'd be great. So one question I get often is that, I know a person in some 3-letter organization that has methods that are certainly way better than your methods, and I really think that these attacks wouldn't work on them. And then I ask to meet this person or talk to them and say, oh no, I can't do that. So if anyone has claims like that or has ideas like that and there are methods that I can test or look at, I'd be very interested. So if you hear of anything like this, anyone that claims they have like really good methods, I would just really like to test any of our attack data on it. So I just want to put that out there.
So you have still 2 more minutes again. So
okay. And I don't know, what other ones would be especially interesting? Yeah, when will our data set be released? That's going to depend on, getting the IRB approval. And again, someone else said, I can think of features for the stylometry system that maybe you didn't consider. Again, I would like to hear them. There's a lot of papers out there, and I hope that once we're able to release this data set, people can kind of have at it and pick it apart and find methods that work better or worse, or maybe do some wider survey of a larger number of stylometry techniques. So I think that pretty much covers it. Okay?
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
There should be the panel for WikiLeaks and censorship in 10 minutes right here in this tent, if I'm informed correctly.